Sabrina, thank you as always for taking the time to be here.
Thanks so much for having me on, Luke.
So, if you wanted to just start by giving your broad thoughts on Biden's State of the Union, and how you think he did, how you think it relates to reality, so to say, and what you think the state of the country is compared to how he portrayed it.
I think when I think back on the State of the Union address, and we actually did a live stream of this while it was occurring on RBN as well, I think I just heard a lot of empty promises. And some of the things that he mentioned, some of the policies that Joe Biden mentioned, those are things that he can do by executive order. And I felt like he was trying to put the blame on Kirsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, and basically saying we just got to pass this bill, right? But some of those things he can do himself. And I think that was left out of that speech. I was incredibly, I guess I shouldn't say disappointed at this point, but I was incredibly, let's just say, not happy about him bragging about funding the police more. I guess I shouldn't expect anything different from him, but considering everything that's happened in this past 2 years, that is not something that I feel that he should brag about at this point. So he said the quiet part out loud. Meanwhile, you still have people who are struggling in this country financially. Some people are still unemployed. Some people are housing insecure in this country. So I think that, again, he's not addressing the real concerns that Americans are having to deal with in this country today. And to me, it just seemed like there was a lot of emphasis on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, obviously, and making it seem like the United States government is doing the right thing, totally leaving out the fact that the United States government is part of the reason why they are in this conflict to begin with. And Joe Biden didn't mention that. And to see everybody in the audience like wearing the Ukraine like ribbons or holding up the flags, I had to ask myself, like, what about the people in Somalia, which the United States government just bombed like a week and a half ago? What about people in Yemen? What about people in Afghanistan that are starving because of the sanctions that have been placed on them by the United States government? So to me, it just seems like there seems to be some type of favoritism when it comes to standing up for people abroad. And I don't feel that when it comes to brown people abroad, the United States government doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but I'll just, for the audience, Alan McLeod had posted this thread of journalists basically admitting that the reason they cared about Ukraine was that they're racist. I mean, one of them had to apologize because he literally said the reason this hits home is because it's kids with blonde hair and blue eyes. So, I mean, they're out and out admitting the reason there's emphasis on Ukraine and not emphasis on Yemen or Palestine or Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Pakistan or Somalia or any of the others. I think that it was absolutely disgusting to see. You mentioned the defund the police, and I something caught my eye. The way that MSNBC covered it, they showed the applause, right, from Pelosi and Harris, and you hear the applause. Then they zoomed in on Mitch McConnell. And the reason I thought this was very interesting is because it's almost an admission that they think it's a gotcha to grovel to the Republicans. Like they seem to think that was some sort of a win for Democrats, that we have completely capitulated to the Republican position. And to be fair, Biden and Democrats never really took the right position. But I you see what I mean? It's like they think groveling to the right-wing maniacs is the right political strategy or something. I was hoping you could speak to the mentality about defund the police in the media.
Oh boy. I think that for whatever reason, the Democratic Party seems to want to get the approval of the Republican Party. And you never see this happen the other way around. They're so busy trying to work on bipartisanship and get their approval. Meanwhile, Republicans are like, this is our position and this is what we're going to go by, regardless if the Democrats agree with it or not. The Democratic Party doesn't do that. They are constantly trying to get their approval. And that has to tell you something about the two-party system. Now, I think that it's no surprise to me that mainstream media would zoom in on Mitch McConnell, because they're really like missing the point here. They're missing the plot. That is not something that should have been celebrated. And seeing people like Jim Clyburn and Maxine Waters applaud this, that just goes to show you that at the end of the day, the Democratic Party really doesn't care about the American people. Now, Jim Clyburn and Maxine Waters, these are people who stood for civil rights at one point in this country. They like to brag about what they've done for civil rights movements in the past. But if you look at what they're doing today and what their position is today, it kind of like negates what they did before for civil rights, because now they are for the police state. They are for the police state right now because the party that's in power, the Democratic Party, wants to fund the police state. When it was Trump who was in office, when the Republicans were in power, they took the opposite position. And that just goes to show you there's a lot of hypocrisy. And it's more so about what works for your party and not so much about what works for the American people. So I just think this was an embarrassment to the Biden administration, to Democrats. I know a lot of young people, especially young Black people, are not happy with the statement that Joe Biden made about funding the police more. So I think that all I have to say is come 2024, I think this is going to be a big wake up call for them. But it seems like to me, there's also a generational divide. The people who are applauding that seem to be of an older generation. And that's exactly what we saw in that audience that night. So I just think they're just shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, and I think one thing worth noting, it seems like they think they need to capitulate to Republicans to win office, but at the same time, they also admit, and they're correct to, that they don't win without the Black vote. And Biden's approval among Black Americans is, last I saw, down in the 60s. Democrats don't win with 60-some% favorability among the Black community. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit to his complete he didn't even, when he said we want to fund the police, he didn't even add the bullshit caveat of like, but I want to reform them, or I want to, like, he didn't even try to rhetorically appease a community that he desperately needs. It just, to me, is incredibly insulting. I'm hoping you can speak a little bit to how the Black community views Biden and how that might affect his chances in 2024.
Yes, he didn't try to say anything that would lift up the Black community. Instead, a lot of his policies actually hurt the Black community. And here he is bragging about funding the police again. This just goes to show you how lost they are, how clueless they are. They don't really care about the Black community. They only care about Black people when it's time for us to vote. And I think this may be the turning of the tide. At 2024, if things continue the way that they are, I think this may be a telling moment. What I want people to understand is it's not like the majority of the Black community is crazy in love with Joe Biden. He was running against Donald Trump, and people were so angry with Donald Trump, they just wanted him out. So I think that regardless who would have taken that position, and this is why it's so incredibly important to note that if Bernie Sanders would have gotten the nomination, I still think Bernie Sanders could have won, because at that point, there were more people that I spoke to, Black Americans, that said they weren't really voting for Joe Biden per se. They just wanted Trump out. So that's what people have to understand. There's no Trump in office this time around. And he's not only losing support amongst Black voters, but this one's incredibly significant. He's losing support among Black male voters, particularly. And that is going to be very telling, I think, come 2024. I think, I received a document the other day, a petition of someone asking me to sign this about reparations, and that they're refusing to vote for Democrats unless reparations are implemented. So things are a little bit different this time around. People are seeing that their communities have not improved. Nothing has changed that is going to really help and benefit the lives of Black communities in this country. So I think that Joe Biden might be in for a wake-up call, and that's good. I think that needs to happen. I think we need to stop letting the Democratic Party think that they automatically get our vote just because they're the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to earn it. That's absolutely. I was also hoping you could talk about, you mentioned the hollow promises, where a lot of his speech was essentially him saying things that he didn't even try very hard to do, things he could do by executive order, things he did not use the bully pulpit to try to force through, and things that we all watched fail, over the course of a year. So it seemed like he was just kind of doing this very performative virtue signal. And yet at the same time, he also slammed deficits and tried to say, we're going to cut into the deficit. So it's like, well, Joe, how are you going to pay for these social programs that you seem to, right? If you're going to take an approach that MMT proves is completely incorrect, that these deficits are somehow inherently bad, then how are you going to pay for your social programs? He seems to have a contradiction there, and I'm hoping you can talk a little bit to the deficit hawkery that is not only harmful to the Black community and racial minority communities, but also just the impoverished community in general and working class people in general, and how that affects the Democrats' rhetoric and positions.
Well, it was interesting to me. He said that we need to cut costs instead of saying we need to pay everyone a living wage. So that fail to me, that's just a fail right there. He didn't mention anything about student loan debt, which is incredibly important. And again, like, this is one thing I agree with AOC on. She said, like, if you don't cancel student loan debt, Democrats are going to lose come 2024. I agree with that. So nothing about that. Nothing about Medicare for all. These are the things that people really need in this country. And the fact, I felt like that speech focused heavily on the conflict that is happening with Russia and Ukraine. He talked a lot about, again, funding the police. He talked about we got to cut the costs. We got to tax the billionaires more. We already know these things. The problem is it's not being done. So again, he's just standing up, giving the same kind of speech that he's given before. We need to make the wealthy pay more and yada, yada, all that stuff. But what has he done about it? He's done nothing about it. He can cancel student loan debt by executive order. He can implement Medicare for all for everyone in this country by executive order, which he's choosing not to do. He can do the same thing that they did in Libby, Montana, and they can use the excuse that because we were in a pandemic, they can actually implement this. So for him to throw, again, he threw it back on the Build Back Better bill. He threw it back on that instead of just acknowledging that these are some things he can do himself. And that's on purpose, by the way. He doesn't really want to do these things. He knows that Wall Street, he knows that corporations are not going to be okay with that. He knows the pharmaceutical companies are a huge problem, but he accepts their donations. So he's never going to side against the people who are his donors. And I think this is what's problematic about the two-party system. And I brought this up multiple times. Until someone comes to me with a way to get the money out, I really don't want to hear about running candidates through this two-party system, whether they're progressive or not, because even if the candidate is not taking corporate money, the party that they are going into is taking corporate money. Nancy Pelosi takes corporate money. So you're going into a party that is owned by Wall Street, and you are not going to change the corporation. And the Democratic Party is a corporation. So I think the thing that needs to be focused on is how are you going to get the money out? And if you don't have a way to do that, I think people need to start voting third party or independent, because this system is not going to change. It's going to be very difficult to change. And I think that's why we see a lot of people that came in as progressive candidates not really doing anything, not really fighting for us. Jamal Bowman at the State of the Union address, shaking Joe Biden's hand, saying, I'm trying to be like you. This is absolutely embarrassing to the progressive movement. These candidates said they were totally fine with being a one-term congressperson. And now we see that that is not true. They went into a party that's corrupted, and now they are corrupted.
Yeah, that moment with Jamal Bowman made my stomach physically lurch. It was like, you have got to be kidding me. I mean, another one that just completely capitulates to the, it really made my stomach. Yeah, that was bad. You mentioned the money and the corruption, and I was hoping to talk about one specific thing that I noticed was left out of the speech, even though Biden purportedly does support this and actually has never engaged in it himself. One very few, I guess a broken clock is right twice a day. That is the stock trading stuff. Biden has, ever since he joined the Senate, he took the position that he was not going to engage in trades while he was in public office. He seems to support banning Congress from trading stock, but he's also got Nancy Pelosi over his shoulder, who engages in this quite a bit with her bigwig investor husband. And that did not get one single mention, not even a hollow rhetorical mention during the speech. I'm hoping you can talk about that and corruption more broadly and how little attention that gets in the Democratic Party.
Well, he definitely wasn't going to mention that because he had Nancy Pelosi sitting right behind him. And this is another thing, like they play to their party. They know that there are politicians that are doing this, whether Joe Biden agrees with it or not. Joe Biden is weak. He is not. I think the videos that we saw of Joe Biden from the early 90s, that was a stronger side of him. We don't see that side of him right now. And I think that Joe Biden was bought and paid for a long time ago when it comes to the money and the corruption. Basically, long story short, both Democrats and Republicans in DC, they can go to the same country club. We cannot. At the end of the day, they can do bipartisanship. They can have lunches together with their families. Their kids can go to the same school and play together. It's all about protecting the status quo. So Joe Biden's job is to get on television and say things that will make people feel good, but not to actually implement them. And then when these policies are not implemented, he'll just do the same thing that Obama did. He'll use the excuse, and this will happen come 2022 when Republicans take back the House and the Senate. He's going to use the excuse that the reason why these policies were not implemented is because Republicans had control of the House and the Senate. And so I'm here to remind people that Democrats have control of the House and the Senate right now. And they're not passing this type of legislation. And it's not just Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Nina Turner said this herself on Breaking Point. She said it's not just those two. There are others who also have a problem with these bills. But Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are the ones who are willing to come forward. And that's because they're in districts where they're pretty much protected. They can get reelected again, regardless if they pass this or not. So at the end of the day, this is all about money. And the Democratic Party, these candidates, they'll continue to fundraise. That's really their goal, is just to fundraise and fundraise. I got a text message from Nancy Pelosi a couple weeks ago asking me for money. And I don't know how that happened, because I've never donated to Nancy Pelosi. So it appears to me that I feel like a lot of people are not talking about the money issue, which is surprising considering that was something that Bernie Sanders' campaign focused heavily on. They're not talking about it. And until they start having those deep discussions about, here is the money, this is why it's a problem, they need to talk about the fact that, why are billionaires donating to progressive organizations? Like, why are they not talking about that? So until they start to have those deep conversations and break down those talking points, I think that people will continue to be blindly led into the Democratic Party and continue voting for the duopoly, unfortunately.
Yeah, they have a monopoly on it of sorts, or a duopoly is the better term. You mentioned sort of the performative nature of, we're going to get up and say these things, and we know we have to just get up and say these things. I was hoping to point out how detached from reality instances like this are. There was this moment where you good? Okay. There was this moment where Joe said that he wanted to tax the rich, and he got booed loudly by Republicans. And it just, the reason it kind of caught my attention is it put into focus how out of touch the discussions that they are having are from the discussions that we, the people, are having are, right? What percent? 80% of the country supports taxing the rich or something like that, but you get half of the chamber booing when Biden says tax the rich, right? It just, to me, it indicates how completely and thoroughly detached from reality Congress and this administration are. Can you speak a little bit to that?
But Joe Biden, again, is just virtue signaling. Like, he doesn't really want to tax the rich either. That's the thing I want people to realize. Like, he doesn't really want to tax the rich either, because that would include Wall Street. That would include like the corporations that are, some of them are his donors. That would include Big Pharma. That would include some of the senators and some of the congressmen and women too. So he doesn't really want to do that. Right now, what he's trying to do is say those same talking points so that younger people will come on board again, and so that people who are progressive will come on board again for Joe Biden. He's not going to, I will be shocked if that happens. And the reality is, I don't think that members of his party are going to let that happen either. So it's just the reality of the situation. Like, a lot of times these are just talking points. They're just saying what they need to say so that they can get reelected again. And another thing we need to think about too is Joe Biden's approval rating is incredibly low. Now, I know that it has increased since the State of the Union address, but again, that's because he gave these talking points. I think this is going to be a really telling moment. I'm already seeing what's happening in the Texas race. We saw what happened in Virginia for the governor race. Democrats are no longer the party of working class people. And there is no party right now of working class people that is actually putting candidates through. Now, I know there's movement for a People's Party. They're not running candidates yet. We have the Green Party. I think we need the Green Party to be a bit louder, a little bit more stronger. The fact that Jill Stein was on the ballot in 48 states, and we had large progressive outlets like TYT telling people to vote for Hillary Clinton, that's suspect to me, because that was a moment when we actually could have implemented change. So I think what's going to have to happen is, I think that the American people are going to have to deprogram their minds and get it away from voting for the duopoly. And we have been conditioned to do that, that there's these two parties and we need to pick one. There's not. There's other parties, there's independent candidates, and I think people need to do something different, because we've been playing the same game for years and it's really not getting us anywhere.
Absolutely. And Democrats even resist when progressives run in their own part. I mean, they resist any sort of pushback to their. So yeah, I'm 100% in agreement. The institution itself is spoiled. And, I'm a throw the kitchen sink at it kind of guy. I want good people running in all sorts of different, I'll vote green or independent, if you know what I mean. I'm throw the kitchen sink at the problem. I did want to ask you about something that I think is, I want to be careful how I put this, but literally the faculties of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi were very clearly they're just not vigorous and seemingly capable of doing their jobs at this point. And a lot of people try to put this back on Joe Biden's stutter that he had as a child. I'm incredibly sympathetic to anybody who struggles with something like that. But I think we all saw during the Obama era, and you mentioned the late 90s, he was up there giving rousing speeches of cracking down on the black community and throwing people in cages, right? There was no stutter there. There was no hesitancy there. There was no weakness there. I think we've all seen quite a change. Pelosi kind of awkwardly standing up and rubbing her hands and things a couple times. And it was just very, very, I know this is supposed to be kind of out of bounds to a lot of the mainstream press, but I was hoping you could talk to it doesn't seem to me like our leaders, by the way, when we're potentially on the verge of nuclear war, have the faculties to be doing their job. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, I do not think that, and I said this actually during the primary debates with Joe Biden. I don't think that Joe Biden right now has the capacity to be leading this country. I don't know what's going on with Nancy Pelosi. She has been acting rather strange. But some of the things that Joe Biden has said, whether it was during the debate primaries, whether it's during these town halls that he's had after he was elected as president, there seems to be a cognitive decline. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a doctor. Obviously, I can't, I technically can't diagnose him per se, but just based on what I've seen, there does seem to be some type of cognitive decline. Now, this is the person who is leading the country, and that is very concerning. What are they going to do in terms of decision making? Are they making rash decisions? Are they making harsh decisions? I don't know about everybody else, but economically, things are still not good. Things are getting worse, especially for people who are working class. I went to go get gas the other day and gas is ridiculously high. The grocery store prices are astronomical, and this is going to get worse. And I think that people need to bring these things up. So the way that they go about talking about it is blaming the companies and saying that they need to lower their prices. But why are the prices high to begin with? This didn't just start. The prices have always been an issue, but they increased after the pandemic started. And it's troublesome because, like I said before, you had so many people who have been laid off. They don't have their jobs anymore. Their employers have shut down. I know in Boston, if you were a waitress or a bartender, there were a lot of businesses here that closed, strong, good businesses that closed. And so a lot of people just found themselves out on the street. And then they eliminated unemployment in September on Labor Day. They kicked all those people off of unemployment. And so to me, it's just, along with that, you are going to increase prices. How are people supposed to live? How are people supposed to survive? And it just seems like, to me, again, it is very dangerous that this is the person that we have that's running the country. And sometimes when Joe Biden's speaking, is very apparent he doesn't even know where he is half of the time. Yeah. And I've said this before, but Joe Biden should have never been the nominee for the Democratic Party. I know we can't go back and change things. But even going back to the Democratic debates, how desperate could the American people have been to still vote for him in the primaries when we saw his decline on the stage during the debates? Yeah.
Or what did he call a supporter? Lion dog faced pony soldier or something. There were some moments where it was what in the hell are you even absolutely the case. And you mentioned inflation there. I think what's interesting is that lawmakers seem to forget their role here as regulators. And there's this tendency to, it absolutely is price gouging, right? We all know that businesses are going to price gouge whenever they have the opportunity to. But but where's the role as lawmakers to alter the laws and regulations such, right, that companies can't engage in that kind of price making? Can you talk about how these members of Congress like to kind of deflect their responsibility off and pretend that they have no role in things when very clearly they are setting the rules to the game? I mean, I would liken it to if you and I are sitting down to play a board game and a third person gets to stand there and make the rules up as we go. Like, obviously that person has a profound influence on who's going to win the game, right? So it seems like lawmakers forget that their role is to literally set the rules and set the laws and regulations.
100%. And I think if we were playing the game of Monopoly, let's all remember how that game goes. One person usually ends up buying up most of the properties. And then whoever is playing against them, you're left with, look, that's how you win the game. You have to buy up more properties. You have to accumulate more money. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now in this country. I think the American people are fed up, are exhausted, but I think the problem is the message that is coming across and the people who are delivering that message on mainstream media tend to be people who are comfortable, tend to be people who are of a certain class. And I'll give you an example. Al Sharpton was on Morning Joe probably about 2 weeks ago, complaining about the fact that his toothpaste is locked up in some of the convenience stores because the crime rate is high, because people are stealing. And not once in that conversation did they mention the poverty issue. They just talked about crime, and crime and poverty are connected. So they'll bring on people like Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton is wealthy. They'll bring on people of a certain class that are going to have the narrative and the talking points that MSNBC and CNN actually want to hear. They're not going to bring on people who are actually working class that are having to struggle. And so this is one of the things that I try to be careful about with my show as well. I try to make sure that you hear from people who are of a different class so you can hear what it's actually like from that person, not from people who are wealthy, who are telling you, oh, well, working class people need this and working class people need that. You need to hear from those actual people. But the biggest problem that we have is like they're still not addressing the fact that the American people, for the most part, do not have a living wage. Look, we saw what happened last year with the vote for $15 minimum wage. We had Democrats vote against that. And I hope that that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. That goes to show you that Democrats and Republicans, at the end of the day, they're there to serve corporations and Wall Street. They're not there to actually help the American people. It is disgusting that we still have $7.25 an hour, I believe it is, for federal minimum wage in this country. Nobody,
it's like a third of a living wage, maybe. I mean, it's insane. Yeah.
No one can live off of that. They didn't even want to give you a $15 minimum wage, but they gave the military industrial complex $268 billion. So now is the time for people to really pay attention to what is going on. And I think because we had a pandemic, I think more people have woken up, so to speak, because they've been directly affected. But if you're not directly affected, for the most part, you can just shrug your shoulders at this and continue to live your life. But I'm going to the grocery store. Why is it if you just want to get like a package of ground beef, why is this $7? So this is a problem. And I think that Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, at the end of the day, they're going to do what their donors want them to do. And hopefully people really wake up to this and they stop voting for these parties, because if they're not going to help you during a pandemic, when are they going to help you?
Yeah, never. Yeah, that's never. They'll exploit the pandemic when they want to, but they also won't help people during the pandemic. And yeah, just to double down on the food point, I know I get up here and put a blazer on and do this show, but I am a line cook, and we've seen an incredible decline. Increase in food costs. So that it's hitting everybody. I mean, it's, you know, and also as a line cook, I don't exactly have a humongous bank account to go out and buy nice food for myself, right? So and there's no addressing that problem whatsoever. And to double down on the $15 thing as well, they hid behind a powerless advisor. The parliamentarian has no power at all. They hid behind that person. What did Bush do in the early 2000s and the Republicans do when parliamentarians said they couldn't do their tax cuts? They fired him and replaced him. So why the Democrats are just completely feckless and weak in every possible regard. Or that's just really a misframing. They're choosing to hide behind a false narrative is maybe the better way to put it. Oh, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going to go with that? $15. Oh, you mentioned that Al Sharpton clip. I didn't see that, but I wanted to ask you about. It's amazing to me how the framing there is poor Al Sharpton has to go get an attendant to get his toothpaste instead of poor Americans who can't afford toothpaste. And this reminds me of how we fearmonger about crime rates and things like that when police steal more in asset forfeiture than burglars steal. Like so the big picture stuff is completely left out, right? How much of your labor is stolen from by your boss and the corporation you work for? So all that kind of theft, all that high level theft that screws over working class people is completely left out of the discussion, and we fearmonger about these tiny little micro things. I was hoping you could talk about those narratives a little bit.
Right. Well, typically what they like to do is they like to put the blame on the people who are suffering instead of putting the blame on the people who have the money and have the means and the resources to make these changes. That's usually what they do. They criminalize the victims instead of criminalizing the people who are actually the real crooks and who are really corrupt. And that's done on purpose because they don't want you to see that crime and poverty are connected. They don't want the American people to have this understanding that most crime is poverty driven. Because then people will question, well, how do we fix the poverty issue? And then that brings things back to capitalism. So what they choose to do is they respond with the establishment response, which is, well, if there's high crime, we need more police officers to fix and control the crime, instead of fixing the issue that is causing the crime. And what they'll do is they'll give out these meaningless programs that kind of keep people in poverty stuck where they are. So yes, you may be able to get like food stamps, you may be able to get some assistance with childcare, Section 8 housing, but those programs don't help people get out of poverty. That's the problem. So it keeps them stuck where they are. And the few that do get out of poverty, they're outliers. A lot of times they have help from someone else, but the majority don't. And so you have to end the cycle of poverty. The fact that we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we have all of these people living in poverty. There's some neighborhoods I've been to in this country, and it was appalling to me that this was happening in the United States. And people, a lot of times they talk about what's happening in other countries, how there's poverty as well. But I can take you to a couple of neighborhoods that I've been to, and you would be surprised that people are living this way in the United States. Paula Jean Swearengin mentioned this as well. Living in West Virginia, they also have a high poverty rate. So I think they are purposely not trying to solve the poverty issue, because at the end of the day, they still want people who are part of the ruling class to keep their position and to keep their power. So you have so much wealth that is concentrated at the top, and the people at the bottom are constantly exploited. And that's why you have people who have some of these jobs where they're working like 40 hours, 50 hours a week, and they're still just barely getting by. And if you're working that many hours a week and you can't afford to put money aside for savings, like that's disgusting. And in the one of the wealthiest countries like in the world, but that's done on purpose. They want to keep you at the bottom. And I wish more people would talk about the capitalist problem, the problem with capitalism, because that's what capitalism does. It exploits the people at the bottom, and the people at the top, they're the ones concentrated with all the wealth, and they're living just fine. The people at the bottom oftentimes have to work harder, longer hours, and that's just to get by. They never give you enough to get out of that situation. They just give you enough to keep you where you are.
Yeah, capitalism is definition, like by definition, capitalism is exploitation. That you have to be
Mhm.
exploiting workers in a capitalistic system. There's no other way around that. It is exploitation by definition. To pivot to something a little bit more cheery and hopeful, I have found inspiration in covering this labor movement every week. The Starbucks stuff, the strikes across the country, unionization efforts, all that kind of stuff. The walkouts, like seeing all this. I know it's kind of anecdotal, but you see all these posts of people finally kind of wielding power and standing up to their employer a little bit. Um, and I'm hopeful that might start to kind of chip away at what you were just talking about, right? The way that working class people and poor people are treated in this country, that we might be able to sort of wield some power here. Can you talk about the labor movement and how that can be a catalyst for progressives?
I think that working class people need to understand that they have more power than they may think. Look at all of the strikes that have happened over the past year. John Deere, Starbucks. I know we had union leaders on RBN from Kellogg's. The
Mm-hmm.
nurses here in Massachusetts were on strike for 10 months at St. Vincent's Hospital. They had finally won their concessions. I think that this is what happens when the working class people come together and rise up. And you have to put pressure on the people who are in charge. You have to put pressure on leadership, the CEOs, who, by the way, their wealth doubled during the pandemic. You have to let them know, if you don't change things for us, we're going to walk. And it can't just
Mm-hmm.
be one person that's doing it. Everyone needs to come together. You need a lot of people. Now, if you have a union, this is a little bit easier to do. If you don't have a union, though, you can still do this. A lot of people can come together. What are they going to do? They can't replace everybody immediately. And I think that's what people need to realize. And some people have said, well, they'll just bring in workers from elsewhere. Not immediately. It doesn't happen that fast. That's why you need to have strength in numbers. You need more and more people to rise up and do this. What I would have liked to have seen was all of these different unions across the United States coming together and doing one big, large strike of together.
Mm-hmm.
One large strike, and call it the working class strike, the labor strike. That's something I think we really need. But in order to actually implement change that is going to greatly affect CEOs and corporate leaders in this country, you have to shut down transportation. You have to shut down the ports. You have to do like exactly what the truckers are doing in Canada. You have to stop the flow of goods. And if you can disrupt that, then I think you will see significant change. But it's not enough just to just say, I'm not going to order from Amazon anymore. Like that alone is not really going to hurt Jeff Bezos. What would hurt Jeff Bezos is if you stop the transportation of goods, because that's the thing with Amazon. What do? They ship you products, right? You have to stop that. And I think if this truckers convoy, and I know some people approve of it, some people don't, but if this continues throughout the United States, I think you may see some changes.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an example of wielding power, right? I mean, I certainly have my disagreements with quite a few of the leaders who have some very unsavory beliefs, to say the very least. And but they have shown how effective, the like you said, the shipping industry. You can shut everything down very quickly if you hit the ports and truckers and maybe pilots or whatever. Like you can shut things down very quickly if you hit those industries. And I'm hopeful, because this labor movement is picking up like this, that we might get to some of those industries eventually. But can you speak a little bit to like what can people do to support this stuff? I'm big on mutual aid. I'm big on like we need to prepare for, like you kind of mentioned, more of a general strike, or at least a very prominent strike. If that's going to happen, there's going to be a lot of poor and working class people who don't have their income anymore and have to sacrifice their income temporarily to do this. So what are the things we can do to build up the infrastructure that we need to succeed in such an effort for, that the capitalists are going to drag it out as long as possible and try to basically wait us out, right? So like how do we prepare ourselves for what would undoubtedly be well beyond the union busting practices that we've seen thus far? They would throw the kitchen sink at us. How do we prepare for that?
We would definitely have to help them with mutual aid. That's going to be a tremendous help to them. A lot of times, I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but a lot of times when these unions go on strike, they actually have some type of mutual aid set up or in place. So I saw this with the coal miners that were on strike in Alabama. They were showing the whole mutual aid process that they had set up. And so that's how we can help them. They're going to need food. They're going to need help paying their rent or their mortgage. And so in order to do that, you would need to contact the people who are responsible, who are in charge. They're usually on social media. They'll have their contact information there of how you can help, and reach out to them and help them, whether it's through a GoFundMe, or actually I prefer people be careful with GoFundMe's per se, but they'll usually have some type of link where you can help support what they're doing. And I think there are some of us in position that can do that. But even if you can't send money, food, clothing, like just basic needs that people need so that they can get through a strike like this, because that's the big thing. Like, the United States government is not expecting us to help each other. They don't want us to help each other. They're thinking that's the furthest thing from our mind, right? So what they tend to do is they keep us divided based on left versus right, so that we don't focus on the class issue. We don't focus on the workers, the labor rights that people need in this country. So I think that if we can turn the television off and focus on helping people who are working class, who are part of these labor movements, not thinking about left versus right, then we can really have a movement. And they don't want that. So that's why it's their job to divide us among other issues. So I think mutual aid is definitely 100% going to be the most important, because they will need to be able to take care of their basic needs as well.
Yeah, they deflect from class with the demagoguery, right? They take 99% of the cake and then tell us to fight over the rest, and it's the immigrants' fault that you don't get a bigger slice, and try to make us fight amongst ourselves, right? It's yeah. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about, Sabby, is just can you talk a little bit about Revolutionary Blackout Network and what you guys do? I encourage all of my viewers to follow Sabrina's show on YouTube, Sabby Sabs, and the other content there on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I think it just, frankly, I mean, even in leftist circles, I don't think we prop up Black commentators enough. And I really support what you guys are doing. So can you talk a little bit about where people can find and support your work?
Absolutely. So Revolutionary Blackout Network is on YouTube. We're also on Rockfin. And there's a group of us, and each of us have our own individual channels as well. So my channel is Sabby Sabs. And what we do is we focus on the duopoly. And just getting people out of it and showing people that both of these parties at the end of the day are the same. They're both corporate. And so we are trying to break that and get people out of the duopoly and push them towards direct action and mutual aid, and push them towards, if they still want to vote, voting for third-party candidates or voting for independent candidates. Our goal is to wake people up, because for a long time, we have just been conditioned to vote for these two parties. Nothing changes, nothing improves in our lives unless you're, of a certain class. And to also amplify that the Black community has been neglected in this country time and time again. So we do give that perspective, as well as what it's like to be Black commentators, and what it's like just to be Black in America, and the things and the resources that are missing from the Black community. And I think that is something that's not talked about enough sometimes, especially even in like leftist commentary. So we were here to fill that void. We felt like you have all these voices out there still telling you to put progressive through the Democratic Party. And then you have other voices who are telling you to definitely vote blue no matter who. Well, we don't fit in either one of those lanes. And so we're here to give you a different idea, to give you a different strategy, and to teach you about helping people in your community, which some of these things we can do on our own. We don't need policy to be passed to get these things done. So that is our goal. We're trying to teach people to be self-sufficient and to work together as a community. Also things like grow your own food. Like, we're trying to teach people how we can save each other and not rely on politicians.
Fantastic stuff. I'm a big believer in direct action. I'm not a throw away the electoral politics kind of a guy, but I think direct action drives all of it, no matter how you look at electoral politics. And I really support everything that you guys are doing. Encourage my audience to check out all of their fantastic content. I've had the Twitter handle for Sabby and for Revolutionary Blackout Network up on the screen, and I'm going to put links in the description box here. So please go follow them and their fantastic content. Sabrina, it was great to have you as always. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thanks so much, Luke.